So let me just walk real quick the high level overview of the login.php page. I'm not going to touch our security stuff and some of the other things, but at the high level, how are we doing our Twig stuff? So we're grabbing a new container and we're actually getting our Twig service. We're calling this new logo service, and we'll dive into that in a minute. And then we're getting 4 different logos. We're getting primary, secondary, small logo 1, and small logo 2. And this file path correlates directly to the file path in both sites and the public folder. And I found it's really important that both those file paths match specifically. And so here you can see we just call one service, and it's going to return back the logo. We drop that into a variable. And then I also grabbed the layout, which is stored as a global. Moving on down, we're going to skip a lot of the logic about redirects and logins and facilities. We come down and we have our view arguments for Twig. And I don't remember if this page had already been a Twig. I think it was, but we had dumped everything into one big Twig file that was not very flexible or reusable. And really, if you're not writing reusable Twig templates or any templating, if you're not leveraging partials and macros and making it reusable, I mean, you might as well just write straight PHP. You lose the separation of concerns, but building the Twig templates in a way that allows developers to reuse it is really one of the core advantages of a templating engine. So you can see here, previously we were actually doing a file read into our variables for the logos, and now we pass in what was handed from the logo service, which is just a file path. And I will pull up our, I'll show you the service in a moment. And then down here, it's basic, right? We are going to fire off a new page event. And then actually call our Twig templates with the Twig variables. And I'll talk a little bit about how the backend is working here, because this is a new event to promote some of that reusability. But for a second, let's log into our logo service. So this is a new service that exists in the core code base. And we're leveraging a couple of Symfony components, including the file system and the Finder tools. Those are mechanisms that may be of benefit to other developers. If you need to traverse the file directories or find specific files, you could certainly do it at the lowest level, or you can just kind of lean on these Symfony components. They're quite flexible, and I have found a lot of just ease of use with them, just helpful. So the first thing we're going to do is, as a byproduct of the way the Symfony Finder component works, we have to do a reset every time we call a new logo service to ensure that anything from the previous query does not maintain its state. So you can see here, when we call a new logo, we just reset it and we drop in a new file system service component as well. And really, the big heavy function here is just get logo. It's going to take a string, and we're going to do 2 conversions here. We've got the site directory, which is pulling our current site directory out of globals, and then we're going to append out the specific type, the specific file path we're looking for. We're going to do the same thing for the public directory, and we're pulling that out of globals as well. And now we're going to test to see if the public directory exists. And if it does, we're going to push it into our paths. This paths array is really just, it's an array that the Symfony component is going to iterate over, looking for our logos. So if the directory exists, go ahead and search for it. And same thing in our sites directory. If it exists, we're going to search for it there. This ensures that if for any reason during the upgrade process, you as the end user does not have those file paths built, it does not throw a fatal error. The Symfony component will get very angry if it's trying to search a path that does not exist. Speaking of upgrade paths, this should work. There's no backwards compatibility problems. Given the README file that now exists in the site's structure, upgrading should be smooth. You'll see no differences. You'll have the new templating layouts available, But if you choose to never touch a logo, nothing will happen. You can upgrade without any changes required on your part as an implementer. I should have mentioned that in the other discussion. Moving on, we are going to then call the actual find logo function, catch any errors that may exist. And then in the event that we do have an exception, it's best case, because really what we're doing here is passing back a file path. We're just going to set it to an empty string because we want the page to render. Not having a logo should not by any means break the login page. We're going to reset our finder and then convert our logo string to, which is defined here, either as the actual logo or an empty string. We're going to convert that to the web path to make sure that we can actually get it from the web path, which is pretty straightforward. We just do a string replace based on whether we're looking at the site web root or the relative path, and we convert them to, I've got that backwards, right? The site file directory path and the absolute images get converted to web URL friendly ones. The Symfony component is not going to understand that it needs a web friendly version. It's just going to hand you back a file path, and it'll be the absolute file. So we just do a quick conversion to make sure that we can actually render out the appropriate path. But let's head over to logo path. Find logo. Here, we're taking the array of directories that we're going to look for as our first parameter. The second parameter is going to be the file name. I chose to hard code the file name as logo because I think it was a little easier to force compliance for the end user. They have to have a file named logo. It can be a JPEG, it can be a PNG, an SVG, whatever. And then we're also going to pass a timestamp Boolean here. And this is to cache bust any previous logos you may have had. And you can bypass that if you choose, but by default, it will be on. So there's nothing inherent that you need to do as a developer. So the first line of this function is really just going and getting the files, specifically the file names if they exist. And that's the Symfony component at work right there. You can see we're calling the finder. We're going to get files that are in the directory with a name file name. And the file name can take a glob. So the logo.star is fine. If we do have results, we're going to iterate theoretically, and there's documentation in the README, if somebody was to drop more than one file in the proper file path, one was named logo.png, one was named logo.svg, one was named logo.jpg, there's no real indication of which one we're going to want. So it's simply going to, whichever one the finder has last is going to be the one that gets returned, which is why as an implementer, and it's in the documentation, and there'll be a wiki page as well, you have to have just one file named logo in that file path. Otherwise, we can't infer enough information about what you want to actually render. In the event that we don't have any results, we're just going to return a null response. And then up in our previous function, that's going to convert the null response into just an empty string. And then at the end here, you can see if we do have a timestamp, we're just going to tack on a query string parameter to the file path, which is going to be the current time. I'm sorry, not the current time. It's going to get the last modified time of the file in question. So every time you drop a new file in, the modified time on the file itself, on the file path gets updated. So if you want to ensure that we're always returning the most recent one, it'll just tack that on. So ensuring that you're busting caches appropriately. Otherwise, you're at the expense of the browser's cache, which is never fun. So all of that to say, calling get logo with your particular path, you're going to get back a fully converted to web path appropriate string. And we leverage that in our Twig templates, which I want to hop over to and start talking about Twig. Yeah. So are there any questions on the logo service itself? It's can be pretty easily expanded. In fact, given the flexible nature of the file path structure that we built on our portal page, we'll come back up here. So you see here, we're just calling this get logo. Well, the same thing exists on the portal index page. We come back up. The logo source, we're just getting the logo, but this time we're calling portal/login/primary instead of core. This is what makes this logo service particularly flexible, is that, for instance, when we put in that pull request for the primary navigations logo on the portal, it's really just calling one more, like we're going to change basically 2 lines of code. We're going to say, hey, give me the logo via the logo service and drop it in. And it's going to be all of 2 lines. And other places that exist, theoretically, if you had logos for invoices or statements, you could drop them in. We could expand that as well. Or as a developer, if you were implementing more documents that have specific logos, you could put them, maybe you have a print-friendly version or whatever. The logo service doesn't really care. It just needs to know what path it's going to search for, and it'll hand back a string. Moving on to the templates, which is kind of the more exciting part, I think.
When I'm looking at my code, I've updated OpenEMR, but I guess my sites directory looks different from yours. Was there something I needed to do to update the sites directory to have that file structure?
You said you are or are not running the latest code?
Yeah, I'm running, well, almost latest, but like maybe from a week or 2 ago. But my sites, and I have the logo service and everything in my code, but my sites directory wasn't updated. Was there something I had to do separately to update the sites directory?
So do you not have the logos folder right here?
No, I don't. It's images, and it has, probably the old one. It has login, logo.gif, logo1.png, logo2.png, and images without.
Is this
you copied the site directory off of when you did the pull from Git repo? Or is it the old site directory? A lot of times I don't overwrite the site directory.
Yeah, I don't. So maybe, but is the sites directory? I thought that's created with the SQL. I mean, not with the SQL, but is sites in the in Git?
Is this so? Yes, the sites default has some templates built in. So is this a production instance or the development easy instance?
Development.
Okay. So there, I think you would have to, did run into some kind of issue here with the development
then how did
stuff.
you create it? Is this an upgrade or it's a new installation?
That upgrade.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I already had it installed. I didn't do install from scratch. I just update it.
So I wonder if,
your sites directory should then still be there.
No, but in development easy,
Right.
the sites volume is different. You might need to bring the development environment down and then back up. You might have to actually destroy the container and bring it back up because of the way, I think it has to do with the way we're creating that sites volume in the development environment. Because I bet if you look at, so are you looking at the code inside of the Docker container?
No, I don't use Docker. I just have it. I don't use Docker.
Oh.
I have it running on my own server in my computer.
Well, then everything I just said is moot because we're not using volumes. So if you've got the login service,
I have to look, but that's all on Git. I thought sites was separated. No, these people have documents. You can't really.
Well, but even if you look in the documents folder, we have some templates that are built in, like the custom menus and stuff. That all exists by default. But we added the README file to this folder structure to ensure that the folder structures get created when you pull down the code. So if you've got the service, I would be confused as to why you wouldn't also have this README file. Because we committed the README file.
Because
into
okay,
the
I'm going to the latest development on GitHub, and it doesn't have that directory structure in the sites.
Really?
I just logged on GitHub, so it's not. If you go sites, it has.
There.
Oh wait,
logos, core, login.
I suggest we take this up after
yeah, that's a kind
Robert
of a side
finishes.
thing. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll keep working on it afterwards, David. So moving over to the templates section, we have a login folder, and we have I broke out the components quite a bit. So we have the base HTML Twig template, and this is the highest level components of the file for the login page that exists. And mostly we're just defining some HTML stuff here, including some Google sign-in stuff, setting our title, doing a little bit of inline CSS until we can fix our Bootstrap 5 stuff, and then defining some blocks. So in the Twig world, a block is just something that can be extended and changed down the line. So this base file is a skeleton. And you see here, I'm saying like, okay, I'm going to make a block called content. We will implement this in our actual layout. So let's take a peek at our vertical band layout. The first thing in this template is we are going to extend the base, which pulls all of this content in and allows us to inject anything directly into these blocks. So you can see here, I did a little bit of custom CSS here that handles the vertical banding. And I wrapped it in a CSS block. And over here, we've got a CSS block. Now, when using blocks, if I don't call parent, I'm going to overwrite whatever is in the block by itself. So I don't want to do that. So I call my parent, which ensures all of the actual content from here gets pulled in. I don't care about the parent on the content block or the pre-content block or the post-content block because there's no content in there. So you see here in this layout, we've extended the base, we've defined some custom CSS, and we have injected our actual content. And this is where we're doing our basically container classes, and we're doing our flex boxes and various layouts. Because all 6 of the built-in templates have the same components reused over and over again, we've pushed them into partials. So this layout can live on its own. It's its own page. Partials are snippets, basically, just like little blocks of HTML that really don't form its own page. They need to be used elsewhere. So you can see here, I am including the primary logo, the login details, and the acknowledgements. The easiest one to look at would be the acknowledgements. So in our partials folder, we're just going to pop over into the HTML and acknowledgements. This is a partial. Certainly wouldn't render a whole page using just this, but I'm doing a check here to see if we have our display acknowledgements global was set. If so, I'm going to define a block. And in that block, I'm going to render a paragraph tag with link. And I want to talk a little bit for just a second about why we're doing this way. The first thing out of the box should be, are we even displaying the acknowledgements section? Because if we uncheck that box, we're not rendering it. We should absolutely kick out of this logic immediately. There's no reason to even think about rendering it. However, if we are going to render it, let's move down into a block. Why are we defining a block here? We're actually rendering content. Does it need to be a block? It does. And here is why. By wrapping this in a block, the next developer that writes a custom module that wants to override the login page can continue to reuse this page. Or perhaps they need to inject their own content into the acknowledgements block. Maybe there's a mandatory disclosure statement that they feel has to be on that login page. They could inject it into this acknowledgements block without having to go and further hack on the actual template itself. They would render out the acknowledgements, they would render out their layout. They would just call the acknowledgements, call the parent, and do whatever they needed to do. Very rarely would you not want a block, because then you can't further customize this. This allows the next developer to do what they want and further customize, which is always better to have that as an option than not have it. Otherwise, I push the developer into a corner and make the partial less accessible to the developer. This next part took me a while to really wrap my head around how we're the benefit of doing this. This paragraph tag has a class, right? We're defining a acknowledgements _ p _ class _ list, right? This is a variable, just like any other Twig variable. It gets set in the login page. Doesn't have to be set in the login page, but it could be. With Twig variables, if you're going to use them, they need to be set. You can get past that by calling this default function. And in that default function, you can say like, all right, we're either going to render the variable, or if there's nothing there, render the following instead. What we want to do here is allow this paragraph tag to be as flexible as possible. So we start with this class list, which is an array of classes. And if you look right here, we're going to kind of jump around here for a second. But if we look at the join tag with a space here, we're going to join all of the array elements. It's the join tag in Twig is the equivalent of the implode function on an array in PHP. So we're going to implode this class list, and we're going to make it space delimited, which is great, because now that means we can have as many classes added to this paragraph tag as needed. And we're specifically, I made the design choice in this list to say, we're going to start with at least text, center, and small. Those are going to be in here. If there's nothing else, we're going to do text, center, and small. I've just chosen on these layouts that it should be in the middle and it should be small. What this will allow is a developer who wants to customize the specific classes of this paragraph tag or any other tag to come in and do the following. Text left, font weight bold, our favorite bold. Next, danger. Now, I can do this in the template itself. I can do this in a module. So if I could extend base and set this in my layout, I could set it further up the chain in the actual PHP rendering where we're defining our variables, and I'll show you how we do that in a minute. And what this does is it makes this p tag able to consume effectively an infinite number of classes that the developer might want to inject. And it took me a long time to get my head wrapped around how to do this. This is an incredibly powerful pattern to use. We've wrapped the acknowledgements in a block. We have set a variable that can exist but doesn't have to. If we don't ever set our acknowledgements class list variable, it doesn't matter, because we've told Twig, hey, if that variable doesn't exist, no big deal. Here's the default that I want you to use. This is a much more powerful approach to Twig templating. And it took me for a long time to get here, but now that I'm here, you will see this used throughout all of the partials. And I'll show you. I chose to broach this with the acknowledgements block because it's a small block, right? There's not a whole lot going on here, but I'll show you how we use it elsewhere.
Can that variable be set in view arguments in the login.php?
Yes, it can. Not only can it be set in the view arguments, you can attach a listener to this particular page and inject it that way. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So you could now, in a module, if you wanted to add these classes, you don't even have to extend the Twig template itself. You could just inject a listener and be done. Is anybody going to do this for the acknowledgements block on the login page? Probably not. However, if we extend the pattern elsewhere and we start introducing it in our Twig templates, then it becomes powerful. There's not a ton of value to the acknowledgements block, but it's the pattern itself. So
yes, but that is, to me, very important, and it's why I really wanted you to point it out.
Yes,
in the future, that's going to be very helpful in many places, especially on refactors. So,
yes, I 100% agree, Jerry. And I think this like 5-minute conversation right here is probably what will win you over in my Twig endeavors, right? I know, because you generally prefer the straight
exactly. And to me, Twig becomes useful in core.
Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree with you.
These one-offs, it's just something else to keep track of. So
totally agree. The naming convention that I kind of landed on, and this might change, but we should probably figure out what to do. My approach was the name of the block underscore the name of the element, in this case, a P tag, and then class underscore list. And that way we have some uniformity to how we're doing this. In all of theoretically, most of our Twig templates that have classes like this should probably render this. Here's a variable. The default is this. Join them together. And this chains together a very powerful path. Now, I want to show David was asking if we come into our login page, we could certainly, all the way down here, have changed text left. Text danger. Now, let's log in and actually showcase just as a proof. And then I'll show you how you inject this into the listener. Login page, acknowledgement, save. Well, text danger didn't work because it's a link, but now it's left-facing text left, and it's bolded, all by adding just this one line. Previously, you'd have to go in and actually add it manually or recreate the whole dang template, which is just no good. Take that off, save it, refresh. It's back in the middle, it's small, and it's blue. So
that makes it easy to also create a global for that and then have view arguments draw from that global.
Yes, although we should stop adding anything to globals ever, forever and ever, because globals is bloated, and
it allows users to customize things. So we want that.
Well, yes. However, we're about to implement a per page setting system, very similar to globals, but that provide contexts. So on every page load, globals pulls in all 700 variables. We could push most of that out to page specific loads. so that you don't want the global login of the acknowledgements to really be there on every page load. You just want it to only render when we're loading the actual login page. So, but yes, you could.
That is a good point. Yeah, because now all the global variables are always loaded all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna have? But you don't need them for all the pages. Are you gonna later on create a way, I guess, to have preferences not be loaded all at once and just when it's needed?
Yeah, it's in the works. So I want to showcase real quick this template page event. This event already existed, and this is the event name. In this case, the pattern appears to just be the file, the actual file path, and the actual view arguments. Let's take a peek at the template page event. So we create a new template page event. We have the page name, the context, the Twig template that's actually going to do the rendering, and then the Twig variables. And we come back here, and this event has already existed. We did a little bit of modification. We added the view args parameter. So, and you see here, this matches page name. We don't have a context, and then layout, which we defined up above as just the global layout choice. The view args part is new. When we dispatch this template page event, you can now hook into the listener, and you have access through get Twig variables, all of the variables that are going to be rendered. And then now that there is a set Twig variables, which will just merge in whatever the current variables are with whatever you call on whatever the parameters are for set Twig variables. Same thing for the Twig template. That already existed. You could theoretically just override the entire template if you still wanted. What this allows you to do is in your listener function to call set Twig variables and add in, well, we'll just do it real quick. I like walking through stuff. See, I should not be writing code on the fly like this. Event dispatcher, add event, add listener. Oh gosh. All right. I think it's add listener, and I think it's going to be template page events. Under events, and then we want to call a function. I'll fix that. All right. We're going to add a listener here, and I want to set Twig variables with, you know what, we'll just pull it from right here so I don't make a typo. We're going to set that is going to be equal to text left and font weight bold. I should have had this. I should have had this prepped and ready to go instead of trying to do it on the fly. So we've added the listener. If I can't fix this in about 30 seconds, I will move on. This is just a proof that it actually render on null in login 253. Oh, that was if that was really my only mistake, I would be impressed. Okay, so that actually did work. So you can see that I don't have to even get anywhere near the layout itself. I don't have to get near the actual event dispatcher that's dispatching the event to hack the view arguments. I can just drop in a listener, push in my particular class list that I want to modify, and we're good to go. So there's multiple ways to influence the rendering of class lists. This can be expanded on throughout the code base, like Jerry was saying. And this is kind of, David, what I think you were getting at, right? Like, well, what if I don't want to mess with the template? I can just go right here. I mean, this is very powerful when starting to leverage these type of listeners. So save that. I know we're running a bit over our 1 hour ish thing, but Stephen, I'm going to take a peek at the chat. Stephen, chart. John had to leave. Nothing else. Okay, cool. I want to walk through some of the other partials just so that you can see that this is not just a one-off in our acknowledgements block. Some of the partials that I'm using here, we looked at acknowledgements. Let me close all of that. So we looked at acknowledgements. The Google sign-in block is very similar. We define a block, call it Google sign-in, include some stuff. I would love to get this out of core into a module completely, but that's another day. The login details further drags in even more partials in terms of the tagline and the login failure, displaying small logos, the whole deal. But you can kind of see that this is the actual form itself. We have partials for usernames and inputs. So let's actually look at some of these. The username field is a block called username that has a div with an ID. And you can see here's our class list again, username container class list. I didn't follow my own convention, shame on me. But I'll land on a naming convention for our class lists. But you can see that by default, it's going to be a form group and a row, which is how the template is built. If you needed to inject further modifications to one of our class lists like this, you can, but it will overwrite the default variables. So you would want to know, perhaps you wanted to add a background color here. You totally could, but you can't just add the background color. You would also want to add the form group and the row and then the background color so that the incoming variable also has the defaults. There's no real good way around that. The developer will just have to look at the partial and understand what needs to happen. But you can see that we have several class lists here. So the row, the label, and then the actual input element as well, the input container. I don't think I allowed for a whole lot of overriding of the input itself, but the container. Same thing for password. And then by defining the block here, you could theoretically inject your own. The idea with partials is to get the smallest kind of unit of work possible, render it as a block that allows it to be flexible, and really the building blocks, for lack of a better word, of the form. Our buttons, so this is the actual login button itself. So maybe you wanted to change something about the way the buttons work, you could implement your own custom block here. I'm not going to go through every single HTML partial here. I think you get the idea. Module developers can further extend login layouts by listening. There's an event that triggers when you can inject your own custom globals. I think it's actually in Steven Nielsen's module skeleton. And you can basically inject more layout options into the dropdown. Talks to the app in regards to the actual layout. And just as an example, the if you wanted to do that, the global that defines the layout is now just the path of the layout itself. So if we go to login.php, we'll go up to the top here, the layout. So the global login page layout is the actual path, and we can, I'll show you, so that module developers can just inject their own. They just define the path and then it'll render out. Login page. Let's inspect this element. And you can see here in our drop-down box, the value is login/layouts/vertical band or horizontal box, whatever it may be. So for a module developer, you would just need to ensure that one, your Twig template file, Twig template folder is injected properly into the Twig environment, which you're probably already doing if you're using Twigs. And then it's just a matter of passing a value to this list using that global dispatch, that global listener. And then you could theoretically have your module create 10 more variations on the login page. All right, that is mostly it. We've covered a lot, I feel. Comments, questions, concerns. I'm super excited about what this looks like as we move forward with some of our user interface and Twig migration. We're not just going Twig for Twig's sake. Now we're actually building highly configurable and robust solutions. I can't wait to see what our medical records dashboard page looks like after this. I mean, this page, the MRD, what's going on here? Patient finder. The MRD page is going to be really impressive once it really leverages some of those new Twig components. It's already kind of there, but to leverage the design patterns that I have been working on, I think will make a big difference to this page.
I guess we're going all in with Twig. When I do a web search for PHP templates, there are like 13 open source ones, and including Smarty, which was already in OpenEMR. Was there, what's the reason for deciding Twig? Did you look at all of them? Is that by far the best one? Or why did we decide to change from Smarty?
So for a long time, we had a historically very old version of Smarty. And then the migration path was pretty difficult. And then Smarty for a long time kind of died out. I think it's in a bit of a renaissance right now, but I think their development really, really slowed down. Twig developed out of the Symphony project, which is a major competitor to the framework previously known as Zend, which is now Laminus. Symphony is kind of the modular, just a high-end modular framework that is in heavy use through major open source systems. So Drupal leverages a ton of Symphony components, and Twig came out of that framework. The thought is, so Twig has been in the code base for several years now. The underlying thought was that given its strength in its close proximity to the Symphony project and Symphony's close usage in the Drupal project, it's probably here for a good long while. So that was kind of the stability I was looking at. But you're right. I mean, we had Smarty. I think Smarty, I think the community kind of, I don't know if they disbanded. I think Brady would know more, but that is kind of how we got where we're at.
You're right. The coupling with Symphony and the ability of Symphony to use component by component rather than an entire framework is the best path, in my opinion, especially when you start planning life cycle. So, that I agree, Robert, 100%. You know, because I've had my opinions on having any framework and keeping core just basic PHP.
Mm-hmm.
But the Symfony and the Twig coupling makes perfect sense to me. You're not 100% tied to it, so
Not 100%.
Right.
I think the development came out of that same project, but I personally really enjoy working the Symfony components because they do such a good job of solving a particular need. I think I was very disgruntled because I was using Zend when Zend was still a monolithic framework, and I got burned because you do so much work and you embed so heavily into it that it's impossible to untie yourself from it.
Yeah.
In fairness, Zend is no longer a monolithic framework, right? Laminus is all components, but I like the way Symfony does their modular approach. So
I agree. So